This is Father Gregory Pine,
This is Father Patrick Briscoe.
and welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining
No, but
wherever you
subscribe
listen.
too, because that's like multiple. Subscribe is when you just like slide in, right? And you hit
That's
it
right.
multiple times.
You slide into the subscribe DMs. I'm actually reading a series right now called the Wing Feather Saga, which, for those of you who recognize it, you'll recognize it as juvenile fiction, which is recommended to me by a Nashville Dominican sister. I think when I purchased, actually, I didn't purchase, I rented it from like a public library. It was like recommended for 7 to 11-year-olds. I was like, perfect. This is my jam. But it uses a lot of words which are like the thing that we're used to, but slightly different. Like instead of potatoes, they have potatoes in their gardens. But they have like a bunch of these terrible beasts named Fangs who populate the island of Scree, and they have names like Subscribe and Slarb and Glip. So I feel like it was inspired by my recent reading choice, but that's besides the point. Father Patrick, how are you?
Well, I did a Father Gregory thing today, which
What was
is
that? Looked
I put
hungry?
on hiking boots and I walked out of doors through the snow.
I salute you. How'd it go? Did you
So
make it?
it wasn't like a Swiss canton, but I made it all the way to the John Paul II shrine, which for listeners, if you don't know, is still in our neighborhood and just like a 10-minute walk.
But still, that's you endeavored something
Yeah,
bold.
I looked at the sun and, I took a picture on my phone of the basilica. The basilica was actually quite pretty, covered in snow.
Yeah,
So, the snow's here just in time for the March for Life, which is
exactly.
super great,
As are the frigid
like
temperatures.
clockwork, because Satan hates the March for Life. Therefore, we all get to contribute our sufferings to the greater glory of God and for the good of the cause.
Yeah, I think like most of my near-death experience memories as a child are from the March for Life. They weren't actual near-death experiences, so don't think that my parents are negligent. But like every memory that I have of thinking like maybe heaven will be warmer than this are from the March for Life because it was always like 14 degrees and it was always tundra-like conditions. It was savage. It was like,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, is that a snow leopard right there or was I mistaken? It's a cold place.
heaven may be warmer, but hell will certainly be colder.
Yeah. See what you did there? You just didn't see that coming, and then there was.
There it
Okay,
is.
so Father Patrick, speaking of the March for Life, I think
Mm.
many people find themselves in a post-Dobbs world thinking, wow, progress, strange. I just thought the general tendency of all of history was in the opposite direction. Or maybe you don't think that. Maybe that's just me. But as we look out and see manifest signs of devolution, a kind of evolution, as it were, namely the Supreme Court repealing Roe v. Wade, is kind of bizarre. So maybe that's a good jumping off point for the theme of this here opening salvo, which is the future of Catholicism, because I think there's a lot of doom spelling out there.
Mm.
People saying things, and then other people saying things, and most of the things said are not good things. So where do you see things? Where do you see the conversation going, and where do you see the actual church going?
Yeah, so if I were thinking of this in terms of a chart, I would think of it in terms of a weight loss chart, which doesn't seem like the kind of thing I would know anything about, but I do, So it's a
Yeah,
difference between theoretical knowledge and our lived choices. So
there you go.
people think that weight loss is just a standard graph, right? That it's just boom straight all the way down. And the reality is that it doesn't work that way because of our choices. So, like weight loss is more like the upsy downsy, all aroundsy journey. And I think that accounts that modeling of weight loss actually accounts for a better understanding of history than the understanding of history, which argues that everything is always getting better or worse all the time, because things are not just going one way or the other. Things are going kind of up, down, and all around. And one has to be a careful steward and to look with a careful eye in order to see, I think, rightly where we're really at. So, for with respect to the March for Life, yeah, we took some heavy losses on laws against abortion, on certain anti-abortion measures in 2023. Are there reasons to believe that 24 is going to be a lot better? Well, yes, actually, particularly when it comes to what we can do to aid mothers in need. So there's a lot of talk at the march this year about solidarity. And I think that's a great place to start the conversation, to continue to build these grassroots movements and expand what we're doing on the local level. So I think that that all of that transfers, that conversation transfers to how we're thinking about the church and how we're thinking about our situation as Christians in the world today. Because if we think that everything is just going downhill all the time, we're not actually calculating where the wins are and the gains that we've seen and rejoicing in them.
Yeah, that makes me think of the general tendency. Okay, so we're inclined to think globally. So you read the news about transgender ideology or the negative effects of technology or whatever else. And then you throw your hands up and then you lament and then you rend your garments and then you go through a kind of whirlpool of despair. And if there are further steps, I don't know because I haven't arrived at them yet. But often enough, like locally, there are many good things which are afoot and like appreciable gains to be had. So, like for instance, we can lament the fact that education is just not as good as it once was. But since the pandemic, there's been a huge rise in homeschool movements or homeschooling in general, and also of homeschool co-ops, and just like a lot of really good resources for people who are homeschooling. And as Americans, we have incredible liberties when it comes to homeschooling, especially by comparison to a lot of people like in Europe who aren't even permitted by their government. And so, like, I was having a conversation recently with a woman to whom I may or may not be related, who may or may not be my sister, whose name may or may not be Rebecca. And she was saying, like, yeah, homeschooling, I think it's going to happen. And I was like, holy smokes, that's awesome. That is a significant change. You went from having free time to not having free time. Or you went from having time to fold the laundry to having time to instruct your kids to fold the laundry. But I think that when we get caught up in thinking globally, it's easy to kind of go down the aforementioned whirlpool of despair. But then when we look locally, like as you made mention, these solidarity movements, ways in which to support young mothers who are in crisis pregnancy situations, that we find a lot of really cool things are taking place, a lot of grassroots movements, a lot of wonderful people with beautiful ideas inspired by the Holy Spirit and carried on by the Lord's grace. So yeah, not to be Pollyanna-ish about all these things, but I think that when you speak of the future of Catholicism, often enough, it's really fruitful to think locally and then, to expand on the basis of what you've actually seen and heard. Yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, another stat that's pretty incredible. I mean, and this is just like this is a hard point of evidence, right? Because I think that the homeschooling thing is right. I think that the growth of classical schools, that's another one that I would point to, the transformation of Catholic schools that were nearly closed, like the cathedral school in Tulsa, for example, was just about out of business. And now it's busting at the seams because it's this super vibrant classical Catholic academy. It's a really amazing project. I mean, another thing that's extraordinary is when you look at the actual data, we're doing pretty well for vocations in the United States. Now, I know taking censuses is wrong and we should be like David did that. And, the Lord didn't like it. So we don't want to be too deep in our back pattery here. But, the stats are telling, right? So in 1985, there were 533 priestly ordinations. 1995, 10 years later, there were 511. 2010, there were 459. 2015, there were 515. 2020, 495. 2022, 451. I mean, that's basically constant.
Yeah.
For 30 years in this country. And the reason I think that's so incredible is we hear a lot of talk about disaffiliation, but it seems to me that we would see a corresponding drop in priestly vocations. But that's not true. That's not what we've seen. The numbers, basically statistically constant. And I think that says something about the stability of the active Catholics that we have in the church in our country and the kinds of things that our life lived together, our parishes, our schools are generating, that we're still producing the same number of vocations is remarkable.
Yeah, and in the midst of a kind of demographic collapse in certain regions of the United States, I think, for folks in New England, for instance, it can be super dispiriting to look around and to recognize everybody at daily mass because they're all members of your family. And then to look around on Sunday and realize there's no one else there. That can be really tough. But when you look more broadly in the United States, or when you look more broadly in the Americas, at least just to kind of focus on our hemisphere for a second, there are a lot of cool things. And when you look south, to the global south, you see a church that's like a Christian church that's growing. I think for the first time, ever, majority of Christians live in the southern hemisphere. That's, like 7 years it's been the case. That's a made up statistic. Please check me on that. But that's the tendency, and you really do see evidence of it. And you also see the fruit born of it. So I think, like, another thing too is with the church, we used to lament, at least once a day, the failure of certain generations to provide good catechesis for their children. And then we used to lament, as a result, the kind of heterodoxy which issued from that, or at the very least, the kind of underinformed advocacy which kind of issued from that. And I just think that we've seen just like a creedal revival in the past generation, which has application, charismatically and catechetically and mystagogically, but there are just so many more resources now than there were. And it's not just like impersonal resources or abstract resources, but there are a lot of people whom the Lord's, like grace has really touched and changed, who are on fire to testify to the things that they've tasted and seen. And they are good at communicating those to other individuals. So we were just at Seek in St. Louis. We're there for 5 days, January 1 through 5. This big conference put on each January, I suppose. It's almost always at the same time. It is
now an annual thing. It wasn't before, but yeah.
Yeah, it used to be every other, I guess, and then they'd alternate with something like SLS, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we were just at Seek, and there were what? I always make up the number. Something between 20 and 25,000 people at this venue, and they were there for the Lord, and they were there for formation, and maybe they were for like high-fiving and friend time spending, but whatever, like people were there, and the energy in the space was palpable. I don't know what your experience of that was, because you had been previously, but only for a little bit. So it was kind of immersive this time.
Yes, I would just first like to say there were 20,000 student registrations and more than 24,000 registrations overall.
Thank you for that.
That's my Catholic media fact check for you. Yes,
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
The experience of Seek is heartening because it shows young people that they're not alone in their faith. I mean, the March for Life does this too. And this is why I think the Eucharistic Congress this summer is so darn important. Because I think facing the experience in New England you described, so many people just feel alone and alienated. They're constantly thinking themselves insane for believing the faith and actually living in it, daring to say crazy things like, I think only men and women can get married, like a marriage is one man and one woman, and that's it. That's an absurd proposition in the world today. We'll see if we can get YouTube to flag this. I'll just keep triggering YouTube and try and get our account in trouble. So I think people feel alone. And one of the things about Focus and Seek, the Seek conference particularly, that's so refreshing is that you're not alone, and that you can take for granted the basic propositions of the faith among everyone who's there. So you're constantly speaking the same language. And we have that benefit living in a religious community every day, but not quite at that scale. So
for those of you listening at home, I don't know from where else you would listen. For those of you listening on the road, tune out. No, just kidding. For those of you listening, proposition is a proposition of the faith, but it's a more economical way of saying it. So Father Patrick just coined it. Note it. This is like that scene in Mean Girls where she says, fetch, spread it.
I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to make it happen. Yes. One of the things by which I was struck at Seek was that there's like an abundance of riches, in the sense of, I mean, the greatest riches of the church are her poor. And let's be honest, we're all her poor, because we're poor in some way, shape, or form. This is a classic teaching of the Christian tradition. It's like, don't worry too terribly much about the way in which you're poor, because you are poor, and the Lord has made it such that other Christians have resources with which to enrich you, because God has given his gifts in various ways so as to ensure that there's always somebody on whom you can have mercy and somebody who can have mercy on you. But one thing I was struck by is like, it's just a total cornucopia, bad image. It's a total menagerie, bad image. It's a total bazaar, better image of just Catholic life. And you're walking around Mission Way and you're like, holy smokes, everybody's doing stuff. And a lot of these people are like really convicted about the stuff that they're doing. And also, I've never thought about half of these things.
Yeah, well,
But it's
that's
like, cool.
yeah. Like I'm at this group, this super dynamic ministry for young adult Hispanics in Chicago that is lights out cool. Never heard of it. It's my job to hear of these things, so I actually should know about it and pride myself on knowing about a lot of these ministries in the church. So had never heard of them, and it's exactly like you're saying, Father Gregory. You just walk around and see so many different things going on in the church that it's overwhelming.
Yeah. So here we are, folks. The future of Catholicism. What is it like? Here's the thing. We have no idea because the Lord could come back tomorrow and all of this could be consumed in a great conflagration. But the good news is that we're not building for the here and now. We're building for the thereafter. So party on. And now we're going to start answering some of your questions. So we'll start with these here Patreon questions at the top. And then we'll get to the questions which have been submitted in the chat since the live stream began. So party on. Father Patrick and I will probably alternate, and maybe we won't. All right. Hi, fathers. What do you think about long distance relationships of 2 hours? Asking for a friend. Are they doable? The circumstances are these people do not know each other previously. So it's not as if they're starting out knowing each other and a move or a new job takes them away. The pool of practicing Catholics can be pretty small these days, so maybe distance is worth it, but also don't want to make the mistake of not having the chance to really get to know someone unsure of what to do. You said for a friend and theoretically, so perfect. Father Patrick, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I'm like 98% sure I answered this with Father Bonaventure, and I think I'm going to tell the same story. So I am repeating myself. But I have friends, a very good couple who met on Facebook and got to know each other very well on Facebook. And that was the means for the beginning of their relationship. So what I said, if I recall, when I was looking at this question, the key really is establishing how committed the two parties are going to be, because I think the biggest sorrow would be one person being seriously invested in the relationship, looking forward to dating, really taking it all very seriously, and examining whether or not this relationship is the kind of thing that they could see as a vocation in their life. Okay, thinking towards marriage, that is, and the other person just not being in that place and ghosting them, not replying to messages, not being attentive. And so I think that would be the greatest danger, is if two parties enter whatever this relationship would be with completely different expectations. I think that's the greatest risk for something long distance.
Yeah, I tend to think like, well, when it comes to dating at the outset, you can be a little bit more choosy. But I think that as time elapses, that's a way of God communicating to you, hey, be a little less choosy. Don't compromise on your principles, but maybe challenge yourself as to what's a real principle and then what's a fake principle. So I was talking to a gal recently and I was like, would you be open to dating a Protestant? She's like, ask me 5 years ago. No. Ask me now. Yes. Is that because she doesn't care about raising her children Catholic? No, but I think that what she's trying to say is, like, I believe that God is provident and that he's providing a way for me. I think he wants me to get married, and maybe I'm just being a little bit, I don't know, too picky at the outset, and I'm not permitting his grace to transform whatever situation I find myself in. Now, does that mean that I'm going to like start dating people who have histories of abuse and, like torture? No, doesn't mean that, but you get what I'm saying. Okay. I have been pondering how to understand the modern teaching of the church on the death penalty in light of the traditional writings on it, Catechism of Trent and such. It seems to be permissible in principle, but the magisterium is teaching now that in light of current circumstances, it ought not to be done. The part that confuses me is the 2018 update to the Catechism on the Catholic Church on this, which seems to cite human dignity as the primary reason for its inadmissibility. How does this square with traditional teachings on this topic, which seem to primarily cite punishment as the motivating factor? Great question. I'll give an opening salvo, and then Father Patrick can pepper in helpful details. So the traditional teaching is that in the order of love, you are more responsible for the integrity of yourself than you are for the integrity of the other. So, like, you can defend yourself against an unjust assailant, and you can use even lethal force in defending yourself. And this is the basis of the church's teaching on just war, but also, by extension, the church's teaching on capital punishment. So those who govern the state or the polity, they want everyone to flourish. They want everyone to enjoy some modicum of happiness as is possible for us here on earth. But some people transgress, some people sin, and some people imperil the common good of the community. And if they do so in such a way which makes them like not reconcilable to that common good, or which makes them enemies of that common good in persistent and terrible fashion, then the polity, the state, reserves the right to kind of amputate the limb, as it were. So this is in principle defensible on the types of principles which we have described. But what it seems the Holy Father is encouraging in the most recent publication that you referred to is that given advances in, like prisons, for instance, or given advances in the way in which the state or the polity can defend itself from the unjust attack of transgressors or malefactors, that it doesn't seem necessary or strictly binding in practically any cases to actually follow through on the death penalty. That seems to be the basic idea. And then I think he's saying the foundational teaching which informs this is human dignity. So we shouldn't find ourselves in a position of killing if it's avoidable. But Father Patrick, you have any thoughts to add?
Yeah, so inside of you, there are two wolves. And inside of me, there's the wolf of capitalism that loves it when the Pope changes the catechism. It's like, oh, yeah, baby, let's run off another 30,000 of those suckers. So, yeah, change away. And the other wolf is the Dominican friar that says, oh, no, we're playing with doctrine again. And I get very scared.
Yeah.
So those are the two wolves at war in my heart whenever I hear that anything has been modified in the catechism. I think that one principle, in addition to everything you said, Father Gregory, which would be my understanding as well. In addition to everything you've said, the only thing that I would suggest is that one thing that's often not at the forefront of this conversation that I think is helpful to think about is the idea of retributive justice. And part of the church's ancient understanding of the death penalty is that retributive justice is real. It must be merited. And in the death penalty, it's pretty clean. An eye for an eye, as it were, a life for a life. Whereas in time served, it's not as clean. And so I think that's one instinct that people have, and that's one part of the theological question where the church is continuing to think about the question. So I think the positive development of theology is absolutely on human dignity. The question about the continued development of theology, as I understand it, with respect to the death penalty, really centers in retribution.
Yep. And that's like in any act of retributive justice, that punitive element is basic. And then the further elements of deterrence and penitence are super added. So it's like you have to have that punitive element, or punishment becomes a kind of strange mercy. And C.S. Lewis makes this point in an essay collected in God in the Dock, which I would recommend. All right, here we go. Hi, fathers. I have a few questions. What does it mean to, quote, give up our sufferings to God? As in, can we just say that even if we don't feel it, and will it be enough? Additionally, I moved to DC, so any recs on young adult groups or service groups in the area, Victoria. Father Patrick.
Rock on. Okay. I have lots to say about both of these things. So suffering is not principally in Christian life in the heart, in the sense that it's connected to our emotions. It's principally in the will, in terms of things that we're offering up to God. So when we say I'm giving my sufferings over to God, we are willfully connecting the experience of our life to the merits that Christ won for us on the cross. So that's what we're doing. We're saying, Jesus, this suffering which I'm experiencing, I join intentionally through an act of my will to the sufferings with which you merited my salvation. That's what's going on there. So it's less about feeling good about it and more about the intentionality of the action. So Father Gregory can further elaborate on that. Welcome to DC. There's a lot going on here. It's a great city for young Catholics. At the Dominican House of Studies, there's the Frassati Fellowship, which meets regularly, that does service, explores the out of doors like I did today, and prays at the Dominican House of Studies. Immaculate Conception Parish is a fabulous parish run by a great priest that has a lot going on. The last thing I would recommend is, maybe if you're closer to the Virginia side, St. Charles Parish, which has a program called P3, and a number of other opportunities. I regularly celebrate Mass at St. Charles and love that community.
Boom. I have nothing to add. Party on. I once heard something along the lines of, quote, each pope is a response to or correction of the previous pope. Is there something to this? It feels like we've swung a lot in this century and last. Will. Ooh, sorry. Will is not his name. Will we keep swinging? Chris. Yeah, so I'd say whenever something sounds Hegelian, I think that we should be a little bit nervous. So I don't think there's any necessity, strict necessity, that we swing back and forth as if thesis, antithesis were the necessary conditions to synthesis. But I think that we often observe in history that you make corrections in light of what has gone before. So you can think about the way that your parents raised you and maybe the way that you raise your children. They probably took a look at their parents and said, I like this thing and I didn't like that thing. So I'm going to do this thing and I'm not going to do that thing. But in correcting, right, you're always ever just trying to do the best with what you have. So you're going to program your kids with all of your strengths and all of your weaknesses. And then that will perpetuate itself from generation to generation. The hope being that each generation takes the time and puts in the work to heal, to grow, to address those sins and vices which have plagued past generations, so that way they can, by God's grace, overcome them. So I think that, like, when it comes to the Holy Roman Pontiff, he's going to express himself in an idiom proper to his time. He might try to correct certain excesses or defects of the way in which, past pontiffs have expressed themselves. Like, it might be widely perceived that this last pontiff, used a lot of subordinated clauses. So this pontiff tries to speak without subordinate, it's like things like that can happen. But I think that we can always trust that the Holy Spirit is working through them in some way, shape, or form, so as to direct the church into the fullness of truth, which is her heritage, without lacking anything essential to salvation. I don't know, Father Patrick, things to add.
Yeah, so for example, if Father Gregory were the pontiff who preceded me and he insisted that all clerics wear beards, I would insist that all clerics be clean shaven. But for me, the issue here is one of is a fundamental concept of the church. I believe the church is the bride of Christ and she is governed by the Holy Spirit. And I don't think popes react according to the means of the world or the means of the age or to our kind of simplistic political understandings of things. I think the Holy Spirit is real, and I think the Holy Spirit guides the Pope. And so I think that means that that popes respond to things they see in our time, and as we've experienced recently, that can be really messy business. But I think that's real, and I am not willing to ever discount the influence of the Holy Spirit on the Pope.
Boom.
To do so is to cease to be Catholic to me.
Amen. Hallelujah. All right, so one more from Patreon. They're going to bop down to those which have been dropped in the chat since the beginning of this live stream. Happy New Year, Fathers. I've always been confused about Eastern churches. Are Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Byzantine Orthodox one and the same? What are the similarities, dissimilarities, and relationships between them and the Roman Catholic Church? Thank you, Lisa. Father Patrick, do you want to start and I can clean up?
Yeah, in this essay, I will. So this is one of those awesome questions that could be a full doctorate. Broadly, as I'm seeing these terms, Eastern Orthodox is an umbrella category into which I would say Greek Orthodox and Byzantine Orthodox belong. And then I would further divide them saying the Greeks are from the Mediterranean island and the Byzantines are from the city once known as Constantinople. Vaguely, right? To speak in broad terms. That because the Orthodox churches are regional, sometimes national churches, they have very distinct modes of liturgy that are highly developed through, highly tied to their particular cultures. So when we refer to when we're using these kind of national terms or local terms or geographic terms to talk about the Orthodox, it means something because of the practice of the liturgy and the self-understanding they carry, which is a bigger question than just a matter of liturgical rite. It involves nation and culture.
Yeah, and I'd say so. There are like 22 ritual expressions in the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church being one of them, which also has various liturgical expressions within itself. You can think about like the Novus Ordo and then the Vetus Ordo, right, which is typically referred to as the extraordinary form or the old rite. And then you have various modes of the old rite, like the Dominican rite or like the Premonstratensian rite, etc. Okay, so you got the Roman Catholic Church, but then there are 21 churches which are in union with Rome. So like Byzantine Catholic Church or the Melkite rite or like the Maronite rite or like you got it. Okay, so many different which are in union with Rome. But the Orthodox churches would be defined as not in union with Rome because they don't accept the primacy of the Holy Father, of the Holy Roman Pontiff. So they have an integrity of faith and the sacraments. They have certain different sacramental practices, and you can think there specifically about the sacrament of marriage. And there were historically certain issues concerning the date of Easter, concerning whether or not bread should be leavened or unleavened in the sacrifice of the Mass, and things like that, which were points of contention. But often enough, the source of schism was political, as Father Patrick highlighted. All right, we're going to bop down to some questions which have been dropped in since we began the live stream, and there are a ton, and there's no way we're going to finish, but we're going to try to do lightning round. So here we go. Caden Jennings.
We're just going to live-splain into the early hours of the morning.
Exactly.
You're not sleeping anyway, Father Gregory.
Well, is that clear? Is that clear enough? I should change my my desk lights to be a little warmer because right now I'm looking a little green, which makes it even worse. Okay, so what do I tell friends who are converting to Catholicism but now feel uncomfortable because of the same-sex blessings? My friend said that's part of why he is leaving the Methodist Church. Also, hi, Fathers. God bless you, Caden Jennings. Father Patrick, you want to start?
Yeah, Caden, first of all, great to hear from you. Thanks for sending in a question. This one's really important, and Father Bonaventure and I parsed it. Father Gregory, you did an episode on Pints about the document Fiducia Supplicans. I mean, from the text, the strict text of the document, I think what we owe the Church is to hammer home that the fundamental teaching on the nature of marriage has not changed, that there are points of confusion in the document because it wasn't clearly written, like the vague reference to couples. So a lot of people are looking at Fiducia Supplicans, the permission to bless people in irregular marital situations, and they're hung up on this point. I think that's right, because it wasn't clear in the document that there's a kind of reference which looks like it could be more that it looks like it could be approving of a particular situation instead of suggesting the church's actual response, which is conversion of heart and penance. So I think that we've got more to go with on Fiducia Supplicans than maybe we first thought, and we owe it to ourselves and to the Church to continue to boldly assert the perennial teaching on the nature of marriage and family life.
Boom. So yeah, check out Father Patrick and Father Bonaventure's Livesplaining episode from a couple weeks back, and then the episode that I did on Pints, which will provide some helpful things. Party on. Is the Pope emptying hell for tribulation, Antichrist? Not sure. Moving on. Oh. Anthony Marchetta says, be honest, if we're up to you, would you have ever released Fiducia Supplicans? Now that it is released, do you agree that priests should not be performing same-sex blessings regardless? My one quick thought is, the language of the document is ambiguous, and many people have noted the ambiguity, which has given rise to various responses in the Church. I think that the occasion of scandal is very high because it's very difficult to craft a particular situation in which such a blessing would be given without causing confusion. And so for that reason, I think that one ought to express a certain hesitancy to do it as a kind of social or political stance. But in a situation where, like, for instance, like a group makes a pilgrimage and approaches for a blessing, you're not blessing particular relationships. You're not blessing particular, sinful states or disordered inclinations or, like intrinsically disordered acts. When people come before the Lord asking for a deeper conversion, right? I think that the document's right to point out that we should have a kind of willingness, but I don't know that there was an unwillingness in the kind of ambient culture and the Church more broadly. So maybe, yeah, those are my initial thoughts. Father Patrick, yours.
Yeah, I think that the images that we've seen of this, we've seen some actions that I would describe as publicity stunts by priests that I understand to be clearly against the intention of the document as it actually stands. I think those things are troubling, and I think that more of them could have been anticipated in the rollout of the document. What's interesting is that on Sunday, Pope Francis talked about being frustrated that there's misunderstanding here. We describe being lonely because of the unclarity of the teaching, and I think this is a sorrowful thing. And I think that this is the result of some of the ambiguity, and that there's a suffering felt both by the Pope and the Church on this point right now, and that's just where we're at.
Boom. All right. Next question is from David Dabrowski. Finally caught a live episode. Greetings and prayers from New Jersey. Thoughts on third order Dominican life? Quick thought is, yeah, you could benefit from it. Many people have, and you might just bop in on a local chapter and ask if you can visit with them for a period of time to see if it fits. The big thing is that you would pray in union with the Dominican charism, that you would seek to profit from Dominican preaching and teaching, and that you would offer a penance which would be of, some salutary nature for the Dominican life. There are other things that you can add besides, but it's not so much about the apostolate as it is about conformity to Christ according to a Dominican mode. So if that sounds good to you, maybe that's a thing for you. Father Patrick?
Full send. Visit our website.
Nice. Josh Dolph says, question, can a Catholic ever dissent from a magisterial teaching? If so, has there ever been a case of such an event to your knowledge? If by can, do you mean permissibly? The answer is no. So we require, submission of intellect and will to those kind of lower grade teachings, and divine and Catholic faith to those highest of teachings. And so I think our instinct should be a kind of religious submission of intellect and will, rather than whether or not this corresponds to my thoughts on the matter or my desires for the church. Because I think that's, without being overly polemical, that's a Protestant instinct, is to judge against whether or not it comports with my thoughts, and then to accept or not on the basis thereof. Father Patrick?
Yeah, I agree. I often think of priests from generations before us that talk about what it was like when Humana Vitae came down, and the number of people that just refused it, flat out. And I hear those stories with fear and trembling, because I want to never be one of those that refuses something the way, with the spirit that they refused Humana Vitae, which is so obviously brilliant from Paul VI.
Boom. All right. Phil Allen says, I love my Catholic high school. Carolyn Kimberly says, hello, fathers. I love you, but you have to start addressing the factual heresies taught by the present Pope instead of ignoring or, quote, Pope-splaining them. He is now denying the existence of hell. Nice. Pope-splaining. Well done.
Great.
I didn't know about the denying the existence of hell. Father Patrick, are you ready?
Yeah, so that was the same interview that I referenced, actually, about the loneliness and with people misunderstanding teaching. So Pope Benedict has talked about this. Pope St. John Paul II has talked about this, and they've used similar language to Pope Francis, saying that they hope hell is empty. Pope Francis said he hopes hell is empty. I too hope hell is empty. I think it's probably not, but I think it's part of being a Christian to hope that it's empty. So on face value, what he actually said generated a lot of controversy. People interpreted it like you did, Carolyn. And, I think there's a risk to these kind of off the cuff statements that Pope Francis makes all the time. But for that one, I actually don't have a problem with it as it stands. I think, like I said, I think we're bound to long for the salvation of everyone, even if we think that's probably not the case.
Boom. All right. James Schlosser says, you put the cool in priests. Nice work. Those things aren't related word-wise, but you crushed it. All right. Pope-splaining. Cheers. Angelic Doctor Carolyn Kimberly says, he did apparently say he hoped it was empty, not that it definitely doesn't exist. He also apparently said it was an opinion, not an official doctrinal take. There you go. Further explanation. Church growth, 3-letter TLM. My church is too small. People stand outside and come in for communions on Sundays. Party
Nice.
on, Caden. Party on. Youth don't even know what a boy or girl is these days. You're not wrong. I think you should read Fiducia Supplicans start to finish yourself if you haven't already, without commentary, before talking to your friends about it. I think it's very clear in context that it's blessing the people, not the union, in hope that they'll amend their lives and convert. You may think it unwise and prudent, easily misunderstood, but that's what it's saying. Boom. Fathers, why is this Pope trying to erase the only place where the faith and vocations are growing? Traditional Latin Mass parishes are filled with young people and babies. That is a good question. It's a real question. And I think that a lot of people feel hurt, and justly so, since the publication of Traditionis Custodes. Yeah, certainly it's just a bewildering time because the restrictions imposed upon it Yeah. At the time, the way in which they were described wasn't clear, and it felt a little bit sudden, severe, like without sufficient, I suppose, leeway for pastoral implementation. What we've seen is that in 70% of dioceses, the TLM has not been affected. In 20% of dioceses, it has been curtailed somewhat or like limited somewhat. In 10% of dioceses, it has been eliminated. So I think that factually speaking, it's like helpful to know the type of effects that the document has had, which is acute in certain regions, but less so in others. Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, like the stated reasons were doctrinal, namely the acceptance of the teaching of the Second Vatican Council. I'm sure you can find places in which people who attend the traditional Latin Mass have difficulty with the teaching of the Second Vatican Council, but I don't think that that is something that we have, much experience of in the United States, and so it felt foreign. It felt strange. Yeah, I don't really know. Short answer is I don't know why this is happening, but I suspect that by being obedient, by remaining with the church, the blessings will abound, and I suspect that worship in the traditional Latin Mass will continue unto ages of ages. I don't know what you think, Father Patrick.
I think the same things.
Yeah. Boom. Hey, thanks. TLM is hardly the only place Catholic Church is growing. Okay, so we got some lively debate. I'm gonna skip a couple of these things, not for the purpose of whitewashing, just to cruise. Love, thanks. Bishops in Rome, they are great. Several exist. Angelic Doctor, Francis. Here we go. Thank you, Father. So late, mea culpa. All right, here we go. Let's do one more here, and then I'm going to bop to the top. Fathers, in my exploration into the Thomistic tradition of theology and philosophy, I've experienced a lot of pushback on using it as a sort of default interpretation of Catholicism. But I see no alternative to it in depth, in breadth, and coherence. What do you think this is? All right.
Yeah, great. So one thing that Father Gregory and I learned in our studies is that there was a kind of default version of St. Thomas that was taught. So theologians refer to this as the manualist era, where you just learned kind of line by line definitions from St. Thomas and from the commentators, and didn't really think through systematically what was being proposed, and did no further richer study with Scripture. That mode was particularly limited insofar as it didn't connect scholars or even theology students to first and primary sources. So in the academy, it came to be viewed as a very kind of limited thing. And I think that was real. And I think there was an important renewal of reading St. Thomas himself and really fruitfully understanding him with renewed fervor in the tradition, through the commentatorial tradition, through the Dominican tradition. But I think too, some of the pushback is not legitimate. It's just a kind of reflection that people have on their education, and so some of the criticisms we hear of it are not fair and are, I think, grounded in a kind of resentfulness of seminary experience that are not helpful.
Boom. We're gonna bop to somebody who made a donation with a question, which is cool. I'm probably joining the church. My wife is firmly Protestant. Any advice navigating conversation with her? How to handle if she remains adversarial, especially as it pertains to our kids? Yeah, great question. Since when you got married, you didn't agree to raise your kids Catholic. There isn't the same expectation as when, say, a Catholic marries a Protestant and the church asks that the children be raised Catholic, and that the non-Catholic party is made aware of these things, and then the Catholic party is bound by canon law to agree to these things. So it's a strange situation in that you're coming into the fullness, but the people with whom you're on the way haven't agreed to the terms in the way in which you are signing up to agree to the terms. So I would say that, like, the Lord who has begun a good work in you will see it through to completion, and you can have confidence that his providence will furnish you with all that you need in order to testify well to the faith. He won't necessarily furnish you with everything that you need to, convince them by excellent argumentation, or to like love them with superhuman strength, but he'll give you enough. And they may convert, but your success as a Christian isn't contingent upon whether or not they convert. It's contingent upon whether or not you consent to and cooperate with the grace that God actually gives. So I'd say be patient with yourself, be patient with them. I wouldn't lean too hard. I think you can just consistently, live your Christian life, pose invitation or like offer invitations, and then see what comes in turn. Father Patrick, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the best way is just gentle introduction, right? And modeling that you actually believe these things and showing how they're forming your heart. Um, that's certainly how people convert. In addition to explaining reasons through teaching, so I think it's really going to be through love, and by showing all the ways that the Catholic faith is consonant with the Scriptures, and living that out in a community where your spouse will feel welcomed.
Boom. All right, we're going to bop back to the top and then answer the remaining Patreon patron questions. Is there anything in particular that your parents' families did to foster your vocations? Or what recommendations do you have for parents to help encourage priestly religious vocations in the home? Thank you, Adam. So for us, big thing was Medjugorje, which I suppose people feel all kinds of ways about. But we went as a family for the first time when I was 3. We went back when I was 8, and then my parents started leading pilgrimages there once or twice a year. They also had a little Catholic bookshop, so that was just part of our family culture. So I got off the bus as a kid and went to the store until my mom closed up shop and then brought me home. But my dad insisted on a family rosary every night, and then we went to confession together as a family once a month. And then, my parents would fast. I wasn't asked to fast as a little kid, but my parents would fast. And then when I was 14, it was kind of like, you might fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. And then prayer was a serious thing. We had a little family holy hour on Sunday mornings. My mom usually slept through it. I usually complained through it. My dad usually prayed through it. But there are a lot of ways to be Catholic, as it turns out. And yeah, we did the normal things, but I think the big thing was the consistency of the life of prayer.
Yeah, my family was a big church family too. So we were very involved. We volunteered in a lot of things in our parish. The thing that made the biggest impact on me, though, was the way that my parents approached our priests. They were just friendly towards them. They were welcome in our home. They were often there and present in part of our life. And because I came to know and love them as men, I came to know and love the priesthood and their service to Christ. And that's why I'm a priest.
Boom. Have you friars ever considered recording posting the Dominican Rosary Mysteries, like on Hallow or some other platform? It would be awesome to have that as a resource. So the Dominican Rosary Mysteries are just the same as the normal mysteries. There are a couple of things that are distinct about the way that the Dominican Rosary is prayed, and there are videos about that online, just like a shorter beginning. We typically don't say the Fatima prayer in between the decades, unless we do, and then a slightly different ending. But yeah, maybe we should. I posted a video of me praying the rosary the other day as just my Pints Weekly video, so maybe that's helpful. Hello, fathers. 2 questions. Maybe at some point on episode on the Litany of Loretto. I love it, and I'm puzzled/intrigued by some formulations, so it would be helpful to me. And I hope to others to have some lines explained. For example, Mirror of Justice or House of Gold. 2, I was hopeless about the Ivy League university where I work, though now, unexpectedly, there are some reasons for hope. And at the same time, I was full of hope for the future of Catholicism, but now I am verging on despair. Thoughts on how to navigate these turmoils? Reasons for hope. Paolo. Yeah, I feel like that was kind of the beginning of the episode. But anything you want to add apropos of those comments, Father Patrick?
Yeah, so Litany of Loretto episode, definitely interesting. As novices, we prayed the Litany of Loretto every Saturday. We sing it frequently here at the House of Studies. It's sung regularly at St. Dominic's, where Father Gregory lives. I love the Litany of Loretto. I think it's a really important thing to pray. I, too, am confused by some of the formulations. So I'd have some homework to do. But I think that it's a powerful litany and a beautiful way to praise the Virgin Mary. So full send on that.
Boom. I have noticed in some Catholic circles an emphasis on heart knowledge of God over head knowledge. The emphasis is on encountering Christ through prayer or adoration, and studying the faith is seen as a distraction from what really matters. I heard a sermon that essentially said more people have found the Catholic faith not because they read a book, but because they sat in front of him in adoration. It's not about learning facts, but about encountering Christ. Father Gregory often says that we have minds with which to know and hearts with which to love. Why do you think some Catholics shy away from formal study of God as a means to better know him and love him? One quick thought is because it can be intimidating, because it's difficult, even momentary thoughts about God can be a bit forbidding, because we're talking about a high thing. We're talking about an invisible thing. Well, I guess not a thing, but you get it. And so I think that people can be discouraged or dispirited by the efforts, but I think that often comes with a false understanding of what it means to study the faith. A lot of people think it means to have memorized the faith or to have learned all that there is to know about the faith. When truth be told, we're being encouraged to cultivate habits of mind and heart which facilitate this encounter, because you can't love what you don't know, right? So we want to begin by knowing and arrive by loving. So I think that, a good emphasis is one that we can place on just this habit of study, trying to feed or nourish our minds and hearts with just solid food, as God gives us to eat of solid food. So that way we might not live like superficially or artificially, but really, wholly and entirely. Father Patrick, further thoughts?
Yeah, Jaslyn, I noticed the same tendency too. And it's one of the things that drove me to the Dominican order, where the life of study and knowledge about God was taken very seriously, like very seriously. Like you can't get away from it in this house. People talk to you about God all the time and fight with you about any random idea you have, if you want. So I found the Dominican order's emphasis on study a great relief. I agree with Father Gregory. I think it's intimidating, it's difficult, and I think that part of where we're at in the church right now is that we have to respond to generations of poor catechesis, and that's why my priority is to emphasize study and the knowledge of God and learning about God and reading books and all those kinds of things that propel you into a deeper relationship through knowledge, because I think that's so sorely lacking. So that might be an overcorrective on my part. But ultimately, as Father Gregory was pointing to, you need both, because the human being is not just a mind, not just an intellect. We have a will, we have a heart.
Boom. All right. We are rounding the clubhouse turn, as they say. And by they, I mean no one. Hello, fathers. Do either of you have any advice for discerning whether a Catholic school is placing materialistic values over spiritual values? When is it better to choose homeschool over Catholic school? Thank you and God bless. Father Patrick, you want to give it a go?
Yeah, I'm of the mind, and this might be incorrect, but I'm of the mind that different kids need different things. So some kids are going to thrive in an environment where there's a lot of social pressure, and plenty of Catholic schools come with that. And I think that's what you're referring to with the kind of materialistic element. It can even be good for them, for their faith. Other kids are going to find that environment devastating. So I think the most important thing is to consider the needs of your child and what's available, because every Catholic school is different and your capabilities as a homeschooling parent are different, and you're not going to naturally match necessarily with the child you have. It's going to be more difficult to teach some of your children at home than of others. So my suggestion is to examine the needs of your particular child.
Boom. All right. Next question from Nudo Espiaggio, which I think means nude beach. So kudos to you for having a hilarious name. I've heard Dominicans talking about vocations use the word connaturality. To what extent should I consider that aspect in discerning a state of life vocation? So the idea there is that connaturality means that given certain habits that you have acquired or accumulated over the course of your life, you are suited by inclination better to certain goods than to others. So the idea is that if you're praying, you're making good use of the sacraments, you've introduced some penance into your life, you have good Christian friendships, you're studying the faith, and as a result, you are healing and growing, so kind of recovering from the effects of sin and vice and progressing in the spiritual life, that you can begin in turn to trust your desires more and more. So it's an overly simplistic answer to say, do whatever you want, because you can only do whatever you want if whatever you want has been healed and grown. So there's an emphasis there on then the healing and growing. Allison Wadowski says, hi, fathers. Allison Wadowski, you are a champion. Carolyn Kimberly, condemn the ambiguous teaching of blessing the coupling of homosexuals. Yeah, so I think that what we've seen in a lot of the commentaries subsequent to the document is that there is a problem with ambiguity, and that we're not being encouraged to, we shouldn't be encouraged to bless same-sex unions or to bless same-sex couples, qua couple. I suppose maybe in that particular comment, the one thing that makes me nervous is the word condemn, just because the assumption there is that we occupy a superior or a place of relative superiority. And I think that we can point out ambiguity. We can ask for clarification on ambiguity. But something that's been, I think, upsetting for the church over the course of the last month is that, like, a lot of people have been condemning this, that, and the other thing, but it's just created a lot of anger and it's created a lot of spin. So yeah, I think it's good. I think it's good to point out ambiguity. It's good to point out certain tensions. It's good to point out things that stand in need of clarification and perhaps rectification. But yeah, maybe I should just stop talking. Okay. Also, I've started reading Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Early on, there is a line about hearing the truth in the words, despite the speaker who is saying it. Are there times when you should consider the speaker if they have done evil acts in the past without repenting, even if they speak a truth? Sorry if this is a confusing question. Father Patrick, thoughts?
Yeah. So one of the things about the truth is that it doesn't care who's saying it, because the truth just is true. I think that one thing that can be difficult is whether we're asserting someone, a particular aspect of someone's teaching in a particular context. Like, for example, in the liturgy, I think it's best to talk about our saints and Catholic minds. And we don't need to talk about all kinds of things that are not Catholic, or to affirm all kinds of insights from other religions in the liturgy. I just think that's a waste of time, and not helpful. It's distracting from the truth. So I can imagine contexts where it does matter who's speaking. That's kind of an example of trying to suss one out. But I think that we should be bold in embracing truth where truth is found, knowing that that's going to lead us ultimately to union with Christ. There's only one truth, so we don't need to be afraid about multiple truths. And ooh, that was cool. Did I cut out?
You did cut out, but you're back and looking
Did I
better than
get out
ever.
my finish? I said the one truth is Christ the Lord. I'm just going to keep saying that.
Yep,
One
perfect.
truth
Full
is
send.
Christ the Lord. The one truth is Christ the Lord. Okay, I'm done
Take
now.
that, rewind it back. All right, we got a couple more clarifications about Fiducia Supplicans, and then a couple more clarifications that the Catholic Church is not simply growing in TLM communities, but people have cited the neo-catechumenal way, and then the Novus Ordo Mass in Ireland. And then here we go. I've read Gary Gilligrange, Three Ages of the Interior Life, that the unitive way is the norm for this life. Can a layman, by trying, truly attain it? Can you quickly explain detachment? God bless. Yeah, so you have these three stages of the interior life, which are sometimes described as the stages of beginners, proficients, and perfects, or sometimes described as the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. And that in passing from one to another, you will have to undergo certain purifications where detachment features in. The first being the active and passive purifications of the senses, and the second being the active and passive purifications of the spirit. The basic idea being that faith itself needs to be purified so that we don't become attached to the gift and not the giver, or nature and not the God of nature. And that will often mean our own forcible distancing from, X, Y, or Z things that we're inclined to prefer to God. And then it'll mean permitting God to distance us from X prime, Y prime, and Z prime things that we tend to prefer to Him, even in simple and subtle ways. So I think the basic teaching is that, yes, God desires union with you. He made you for union. You can rely upon Him to make you as holy as He wants to make you, and that you can pray simply for the grace to consent and cooperate, and then leave it to Him to dictate how it unfolds from there. All right, we're in the lightning round. So last question or two. As Thomas, if you had to name the next school of thought that you had most respect for, what would it be? Father Patrick.
Calvinists.
Nice. I would say Augustinians.
Nice.
All
Oh, you stayed
right.
in the church. That was good.
Hey, cheers. Yeah, we got more clarifications about TLM and Fiducia Supplicans. Here we go. Aaron Banky says, do you have any tips for discerning spiritual attacks / warning versus fear that should be persevered through? Father Patrick?
Hi, Aaron. Let's see, what would I say? Discerning spiritual attacks. I think that the best way to handle these things is to look to the cross and to focus on Christ, and that when we direct our mind's eye to the Lord, usually the things distracting us from Him fall away. So I think that beginning to do that helps us to assess where something is really coming from, why we're afraid. And then from that point, we can move on to whether or not we have to move, adapt, or just persevere through.
Boom. All right. We're going to wrap it
Not
up
the
there.
most sophisticated answer, Aaron. Sorry.
No, it's great. I'm just trying to moderate comments at this stage.
Yeah, they're pretty fun ones down below there.
Dude, the world is such a
Yeah.
wild place.
Yeah.
So, all right, squad. Thanks as always for listening to Godsplaining. If you would follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Like the episode, subscribe on YouTube, and leave a 5-star review, or just give it a thumbs up. I think that's what you do. Yeah, like the episode if you would. If you would like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, you can follow the link in the description. And you'll also find links there to get merchandise and to read about upcoming Godsplaining events. So some cool announcements of upcoming Godsplaining events in a town near you will be coming shortly as we unveil a couple one-day events and a couple of retreats. So we're pumped. Hope you're pumped. All God's children are pumped. Know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.